I've always enjoyed teaching language arts to my students. No matter what grade I was teaching, that was always something I loved to do. But in talking to other teachers, I know that it was a very daunting process for many teachers, because language arts, the way that the curriculum is designed, it's a lot more open-ended, and multiple entry points make it sometimes intimidating for teachers to know where to begin, as compared to science or social studies or math that seem more linear, more laid out. And so in particular, when I was dialoguing with teachers, writing kept coming up as one of those areas that they didn't feel confident as writers themselves, and didn't feel like they had the skills in order to teach writing. You know, when I think about the title, how do I get them to write? I think that reflects what's going on in our classrooms right now, because we do have a lot of reluctant writers. If we teach grade 1, we're pretty fortunate because those kids are excited about learning to write. It's new. It's a newfound form of communication for them, so there's less reluctance there. But as we teach the older grades, I think we have more and more reluctant writers in our classrooms. And so that was my dilemma too. How do I get them to write? Where do I start? And how do we approach it with them? Break those barriers for them. You know, my resource I tried to create so that it was very practical for teachers, so that they could read it or come to a session that I'm doing and walk away the very next day feeling a little bit more confident teaching writing. And I want kids not only to write more, I want them to write well, and I also want them to enjoy writing. And I think a lot of that comes from the teacher. So if we as teachers feel more confident teaching our kids to write, then the kids are going to enjoy the process a whole lot more. And when I think also about, you know, the importance of literacy, I think that is an important realization for our kids, because what we're teaching is not simply going to occur within the four walls of our classroom and then that's it. Literacy is something that follows them throughout their lives, and there are skills that they're going to be using every day. And to help illustrate that, I often share a story with my students about an incident when I was an assistant principal in a school, and I had a parent who came to me in tears one day. And I tell the students, she came to me in tears and she shared with me a secret. And I asked the students if they could guess what the secret might be. And nobody ever has. They've never guessed specifically what it was. She shared with me that day that she was illiterate. And for our students to hear something like that, that's completely outside what they think is possible. A parent illiterate, how could that be? And this was a secret she had kept even from her family. So when I share that with our kids, I think they start to realize that, we talk about what she couldn't do. She couldn't read bedtime stories to her kids. She couldn't help them with homework. She couldn't read a menu in a restaurant. If one of her children had an allergy, she couldn't read the ingredients on a label, a food label. And when kids see literacy in that way as something as absolutely necessary for day-to-day living, child and adult, I think that really sets the foundation of the importance of literacy within our classrooms. They see it as a real life skill. And then from there, there's so much that we can do to help them to enjoy the process even more. Writing is one of those things that helps us in so many different ways. I think it helps us even in terms of identity. When we are writing, we're constructing meaning and we're reflecting on what's going on in our lives. It is very practical. It's something that we use all the time, but I also think there's more to it than just the practicality of it. I think it can really impact us as people. The first year that I introduced free writing to my grade 6 class, I had been watching my reluctant writers and trying to figure out a way to engage them in writing. And I'll never forget, there was one student in particular who was, he had previously just refused to write. It wasn't even that he would write a little. He would just refuse to write. It wasn't something that he was wanting to do at all. And it wasn't long after the first couple of free writes where all of a sudden, out of the blue one day, he said to me, "Can we free write about this?" And I thought, wow, like that to me was success. The fact that he was willing and asking to write something that you wouldn't have expected from him ever. It's Peter Elbow's term, free writing, and the process is described in his book and also in Natalie Goldberg, Writing Down the Bones. She uses that. She doesn't use the term, but she uses the process. And when we think about free writing, it breaks those barriers down. Initially, when I'm asking kids what they don't like about writing, the things that they share with me is that they don't feel confident. They're not good at it. They don't know how to spell. They don't know what to say. Those typical things that we hear, and it doesn't really matter the grade level. They all say the same things. And so what I find with free writing is it breaks through those barriers because it really separates. Peter Elbow talks about separating the processes of critical thinking and creative thinking, that separating the two in our brain. So when we're actually engaging the process of free writing, we're writing nonstop. And kids always think that, how am I possibly going to do that? Write nonstop. I don't like writing to begin with, and you're asking me to write nonstop. But we do it with a prompt. And so I give them a simple prompt. The first one I tend to use with kids, because it always works, is I remember. We give them that prompt and I tell them, you write the first thing that pops into your mind. You're going to shut off that critical thinking brain for a few moments. You're not going to let that critical thinking brain stop you and say, no, you shouldn't write about that, or that's not good enough, or even you don't know how to spell that. You just write what comes to mind. And the trick is, as soon as your pen or your pencil stops moving, you write the prompt again. And again, the first thing that comes into mind, you just write. And the one of the critical elements of free writing is that I tell the kids, I'm not going to read this unless you want me to read it. And I think that's really important because kids do censor themselves if they think the teacher is going to read it. And they might be reluctant to write what they remember that happened. Maybe it was even something significant in their home that morning. Maybe they're remembering a fight that their parents had. And they might not write that if they know I'm going to read it. But I always give them the choice. And by doing that, what I found is it actually did the opposite. More students were wanting to share because they did break through these barriers, and they actually became impressed at their own writing. Instead of overthinking it with that critical thinking brain in the way, they just started writing more freely, and the writing became raw and real and fabulous. Like, it was just, the difference was amazing. And it's not that free writing has to stay in that initial form. Of course, the processes of revision and editing can come later if we want it to, but just to get them more comfortable writing, breaking those barriers down. Free writing, I say it was the game changer in my class. I've had a lot of positive feedback on the narrative writing and the plot patterns in that area, but the free writing definitely was what people responded to the most. So I actually am just finishing up a second book for Pembroke as well, that is specifically on free writing, but really looking at free writing across the curriculum, helping teachers use writing in all disciplines of study. It's not only about teaching kids how to write, it's also using writing as a way to construct meaning. And that's what I'm, working on right now in the second book. So it's the one time that I ask teachers to write with their students. And teachers they always cringe when I say it because they don't feel like they're good writers. But it's not about that. It's understanding that writing is a process. Writing does make us vulnerable. And so putting ourselves out there as well. And so the students can see, well, I wrote that in 7 minutes or 8 minutes. And, there's lots of opportunity for revision later, but this is just a way to get our ideas down on paper. And the other benefit of having the teachers write with the students is that, especially, you talk to anyone who teaches primary, you get the tugs on your pant leg. Teacher, how do I spell? They when they're writing, that's what they're asking. They want to know how to spell something. And so when the teacher is writing, they say, oh, you can't ask me how to spell something. I'm busy writing too. And it's amazing how it just creates a different environment for writing in the classroom. Like, it really does impact the way the kids perceive the writing time. They value the writing time because they see that we're engaged in it as well. The environment that we create in our classroom is so critical because writing, like I said, it does make us vulnerable, and we need to make sure that our students feel safe enough to share, safe enough to take risks in our own classroom. And so it might not sound like it's connected to writing, but I very much believe that that has to be in place first before we can do anything else. Relationships are key. And if our students trust us, they're much more willing to buy into whatever it is that we're going to have them engage in. I really believe very much in connecting our reading and writing. So even though my book is about writing, for the most part, the connection between the reading and writing is essential. And I use mentor texts every day in my classroom. And to remember that the books that we have on our bookshelves are valuable teaching tools that can absolutely impact the way that our students look at their own writing. So using those, looking at a picture book in a new way would be something that I would suggest. And thinking about, oh, what did the author do well in terms of writing that we could then look at with our students so that they can do the same within their own writing. And just realizing that we're surrounded by these great teaching tools, and to utilize them as much as we can.